Now I'll quickly show some features of the data perspective. So let's have a look at this create purchase order. First, every net can be assigned, and we can define a number of global or net variables for each net. This can be done from here, net, update net detail, and here I have the list of net decomposition variables. For example, I have a purchase order manager. That's the variable I'm going to use at runtime to assign a purchase order manager to the task modify purchase order. Remember this, that the distribution set that can be dynamically set by means of a net variable. And then I have other variables that are used throughout this net. For example, the purchase order will indeed contain the information about the purchase order, which is created by the first task. So if I right-click on a task, then I can go on update parameter mappings, and I will see essentially the data perspective, so the data information related to this very task. Here I can see that there are a number of task variables that I need. In this case, they are only two. The purchase order, that is the real document, the business document that I need to produce as a result of executing an instance of this task, as well as this purchase order manager, this variable that I'm going to fill up at runtime with the name of the participant who I want to be able to modify the purchase order. So, a purchase order manager creates the purchase order and then decides who within an organization is going to modify this purchase order. I make use of input and output parameters essentially to copy the value of net variables onto task variables, and vice versa. Once I have filled out these task variables, for example, the user can do that through a form, through a web form, then I need to collect this data and I can use an output parameter to copy this data back onto the global variable, such that the global variable will ensure me the data flow, would allow me to achieve a data flow, that is to pass information across the various tasks of a net. In this case, we can see that through this operation, we are copying the value of the purchase order manager global variable onto that, or onto the content, onto the task variable purchase order manager, and so on. Then I can any manual task is meant to be executed by a participant in the organization. So, in order to show the content of the task variables to the participants that have been offered and then allocated the task, an instance of that task, I need to use a form. And in YAWL I have two options. I can either stick with the dynamically generated forms. These are done in a standard way, although I can set some attributes. For example, to customize the look and feel of this form that is automatically generated. So, for example, I can choose the font style for a particular field, I can choose the justification, I can specify whether or not an element should be read-only, etc. Or I can actually link a task to a custom form that I might have designed separately, and then I just link it to that form. So in this case, to this task. So for example, by using the set custom form, I can specify the address of where this form is available within my web server. Okay, now I will show how I can execute instances of this order fulfillment process. So I log in into the administration console as the administrator. Once I'm in, I have a number of operations that I can perform. So for example, I can have access to the organizational data, where I can see all the roles that are available, the capabilities, the positions, the organizational groups, as well as I can access the list of users of my organization. For example, we can see that Fredo Corleone has a role of purchase order manager. So this is a potential person, so is a participant that can potentially be allocated an instance of the create purchase order. So this Fredo guy, Fredo Corleone, will be in the distribution set for that first task. Now, to run a case, I have first to load a specification. That's what I've already done, and then I can launch a case. Now, as I launch a case, I can go to admin queues and check the list of participants that have been offered this an instance of the first task in this order fulfillment process. For example, the first task was create purchase order, and I can see that has been assigned to 5 people, among which there is this guy, Fredo Corleone. Now, I have 2 options to access this information through a web form. I can do that by means of the standard work list application. So I can log in as Fredo Corleone, and then I can see that I've been offered a task, or I can do that in the context of an organizational mashup. Let's imagine that I'm Fredo Corleone, and I'm an employee of this organization, Genco Oil, which is settled in Sicily, but distributes oil throughout the world. So I open my mashup application, which has been branded with Genco Oil, and then from here I can actually add a gadget for the work list application of YAWL. So I've added the gadget. Now I can go back, and I can see that I have a gadget which I can configure with the information about my participant, so about my person. So Fredo Corleone is the user ID. Then I set the password. I can actually put also a name and some other minor properties. And then I will see that now I can actually control my work list from within my organizational mashup. In fact, Fredo Corleone, as we know, has been offered a work item, which is create purchase order. So available essentially list all work items that have been offered to this user, while assign list all those work items that have been actually allocated to this user, and then in progress all those that have actually started for this user. So then I can click on this, and I will be automatically redirected to the custom form that was assigned to this to this task. So again, the custom form has been customized to the look and feel of this organization. So here I have to fill out this form with company details, order details. So for example, I can specify the order date, the line items, and so on. Another very convenient feature of a custom form is that you can actually load a template that you have already filled out with the content of this form. So I can upload that by means of a standard XML file, and then the form has already been automatically filled out. So a typical scenario could be that I have this information stored for this customer, because this is a usual customer who keeps on ordering nice bottles of oil, but now I can make some changes to this form. For example, I can change the quantity of 10-liter olive oil bottles to 10. I can remove the 15-liter ones. So this is a customer who's having who manages a restaurant, and I can decrease the quantity of cooking oil and so on. Then the freight cost would be recalculated. For example, 156. The delivery is in Brisbane. And then I can set some options that will affect how the payment is handled. For example, if the invoice is required, and if it is a prepaid shipment. So for example, in this case, it is not a prepaid. So once I'm done, I can submit this form. But let's assume that I forgot to fill out some information. Then if I try to complete, I will see that there is an automatic checker for this form, which tells me that some fields have been left empty. Like in this case, unit quantity, I have to enter an integer. And this is only done for the mandatory fields. Clearly not for the optional ones, like those that allow me to leave some documentation or comments. So once I'm done, I can complete this and submit. So the task has been submitted. So if I go back and I update my web page, I see that now I no longer have that work item within the available ones. So now, as we remember, the second step is that of approving the purchase order, which was assigned to a senior supply officer, for example, Tom Hagen. So now if I log in the mashup application of Tom Hagen, I will see that it's actually been offered this work item, approve purchase order. So then I can actually approve it and submit. And so on, and the process can go.